ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं। शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। ॐ पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम्। अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणी। यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यं सामगाः। ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनः यस्यान्तं न विदुःसुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः। Namaskar. We are in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and in one of the most important sections, the 18th verse, Lord Krishna revealed the nature of self as actionless. Actionless means the one to whom the action does not affect, does not touch, who is akriya, never performs action, never undergoes any change. So there are many ways of describing Atma. Nitya, Shuddha, Buddha, Mukta, Satyam, Jnanam, Anandam, and so forth. And with reference to karma, the way to describe Atma is akarma. How the self is always akarma, actionless. Even when karma or action is performed, being performed. For the very simple reason that action is performed at one level and Atma obtains at another level. Atma is I, the subject. Action is performed by what is object. This body, mind, sense complex, which is upadhi, which is the vehicle of manifestation of the self, the consciousness. Because the self, in order to become a participant as though in the day-to-day activities, needs the help of this body-mind-sense complex, with which it is not related. Just as electricity needs tungsten filament in order to manifest as light, so self, the consciousness, as though needs this body-mind-sense complex to manifest as life, to manifest as action, to manifest as the various things that are being done in day-to-day life. Everything is done by the body-mind-sense complex, which is in the position of object. And Atma, the self, is the subject. The subject is the one who is never affected, never touched by the object. Just as in presence of electricity, the fan turns around, without electricity, just the presence of electricity. Just as in presence of magnet, the iron filings are activated. Just as in presence of sun, the whole universe also is enlivened. So also in the presence of Atma, the self, the consciousness, this body-mind-sense complex, which is by itself inert or lifeless, becomes lively, becomes enlivened. And all the potential of change belongs to this body-mind-sense complex, the upadhi. So that is where the action is truly. That is where the action is performed. That is, inaction also belongs there only. The experience, the result of action also belongs there. Whole vyavahara belongs only at the level of the body-mind sense complex. It is true that this body-mind sense complex cannot function without consciousness. Because the body, the mind, sense organs are enlivened in presence of consciousness. All the vyavahara takes place at that level, in presence of consciousness, self, I. And thus the I, the conscious, ever free, ever liberated, ever pure, ever limitless. Unfortunately, what happens is there is a mutual identification, the self with the non-self. And therefore, I suffer from the notion that I perform the action. I experience the result of the action. I am the karta, I am the bhokta. That Atma is akarta, abhokta is said by Lord Krishna in many places. Ya enam veti hantaram yaschayanam manyate hadam ubhau tau na vijanitaha nayam hantina hanyate. One who thinks that the Atma performs actions, the one who believes that the Atma becomes the object of somebody else's action, victim of somebody else's action, both of them do not know. Nayam hantina hanyate. This one does not kill, nor is it being killed, does not perform an action, nor does it become the object of somebody else's action. On account of identification of upadhi, we entertain this false notion, I am the performer of action, I am the experiencer of results of action. To enable us to do this viveka or separate the self from the non-self, which Lord Krishna has done in different ways. This fourth chapter it is done this way. Karmani akarmayah pasye. Recognize, Arjuna, that all the karma is performed by the upadhi. Even when one says, I did not do anything, even that not doing also belongs to upadhi. Atma cannot be said to be doing something, nor can Atma be said to be not doing something. Because not doing something also is only in the part of the one who does something. So Atma never does anything, therefore we cannot say it does not do anything also. So doing and non-doing, activity and inactivity, both of them are at the level of the body-mind-sense complex. And this is how the Atma-Anatma Viveka, the separation of self from the non-self. And in several verses, Lord Krishna gave a beautiful description of the wise person who has this knowledge and who therefore abides in the true nature of the self, which is actionless, ever unaffected by anything. This has been described earlier also. The second chapter, this wise person was described as Sthita Prajna, as a man of abiding wisdom. In third chapter also there were a couple of verses. Yastvatmareva syat atmatruptasya manavah atmanyevacha santushtah tasya karyam na vidyate. And in the fourth chapter, in these verses, Lord Krishna describes the nature of the self, the nature of the wise person. The last verse that we discussed was the 24th verse. Brahmarpanam brahmahavihi brahmagnau brahmanahutam brahmaiva tena gantavyam brahma karma samadhina. Describing the vision of the wise person for whom everything is Brahman, because that's the reality. Even this body, mind, sense complex in the ultimate analysis is only Brahman. If you look at anything such as a part, any object, and analyze what it is, it will only turn out to be Brahman, which we described earlier. Like objects such as a part has 5 aspects. The part is asti. The part shines in my consciousness, bhati. The part is dear to me because it is useful to me. The part is a name, part, and has a form corresponding to the name part. Asti, bhati, priyam, nama, rupa. In this, any object has these 5 aspects, asti, bhati, priyam, name and form. And what separates one object from the other is the name and form. But then, the most common denominator in forming everything is asti, bhati, priyam. And what's the relationship of this name and form with asti, bhati, priyam? Even though we say that there are 5 aspects, asti, bhati, priyam, and name and form, nama, rupa. Remember that they do not belong to the same locus. Asti, bhati, priyam belongs to the subject. Nama, rupa belong to the object. They don't belong to the same locus, even though we place them in the same locus. And therefore, the true nature of any nama, rupa, any object, any name and form is nothing but asti, bhati, priyam. Satchit ananda, satyam, jnanam, anandam, brahma. Therefore, what is Brahma? That is the vision of the wise person. That vision of the wise person is described in this 24th verse as Brahmarpanam with reference to the fire ritual, a yajna, which we elaborately described last time. That this vision, what is Brahman, is described with reference to the yajna. Brahmarpanam, Brahmahavi, Brahmagno, Brahmanahutam. For a wise person, Arpanam, a ladle, is Brahman. So that with which we offer the oblation is called a ladle. A wooden spoon is also Brahman. Brahmahavihi, the material that is offered to fire is called Havish, that is also Brahman for the wise person. Because ladle is Nama Rupa. What it is Asti Bhati Priyam. Havish also, that material is Nama Rupa and its reality is Asti Bhati Priyam. Brahmagno, even fire also is name and form, its reality is Asti Bhati Priyam. Brahmanahutam, the one who offers also is nothing but Brahman with a name and form. Hutam, the whole action also is Brahman. Brahmaevatena gantavyam. So Lord Krishna deliberately describes the vision of the wise person, the knowledge, in the context of a yajna. It could have been simply said, what is Brahman? And it would have included, we would have accounted for all of this. But Lord Krishna chooses to describe the vision of the wise person as ladle is Brahman, oblation is Brahman, fire is Brahman, offerer is Brahman, action is Brahman. Why would it be so? To equate this knowledge with yajna. We said last time that yajna or fire sacrificial ritual is looked upon as the most exalted in Vedas. Therefore, when something is equated to yajna, it is praised as the most exalted. And therefore, to praise the vision of the wise person that what is Brahman, that vision or jnanam or the knowledge is equated to a yajna, to praise that knowledge, extol the knowledge. Jnana stuti. Now Lord Krishna, as Bhashyakara Adi Shankaracharya explains, the verses that follow. Now in these verses, Lord Krishna describes different kinds of yajnas, where a yajna is not necessarily confined to a fire ritual, although that certainly is yajna. But any action that is performed as an offering to the Lord can be called yajna. Yajno vai Vishnu. Even Lord Vishnu is called yajna, is called Vishnu, Vishnu is called yajna. So, offering to Vishnu, offering to Ishvara becomes yajna. So Lord Krishna gives a very broad definition of the word yajna in the Bhagavad Gita. That no doubt the conventional fire ritual is yajna. But the main spirit of that fire ritual is offering. We said that devatodeshena dravyatyagaha yagaha. Giving away a dravya, the material to devata, is called yaga, and pouring that material into the fire is called homa. Therefore, the most important component or aspect of a yajna is this offering. Indraya Swaha, offering to a devata. Where a devata is invoked, an offering is made to him. And therefore, Lord Krishna says, any action performed in the spirit of offering to Ishvara can be called yajna. And the yajna is not just confined to yajna-shala now, but yajna has a very widespread meaning that any even mundane, so-called mundane action also, if performed in the spirit of offering to Ishvara as a contributor, that action becomes yajna. In that spirit, in the subsequent verses now, Lord Krishna describes the so-called number of so-called yajnas, which we can look upon as the spiritual sadhana or practices that suit us. So a number of spiritual practices are described, which when performed in the spirit of offering to Ishvara becomes yajna. And Lord Krishna has said, it is the spirit of yajna, the offering, which is called the yoga, karma yoga. Yoga karmasu kausalam. When any karma is performed with yoga, with the spirit of offering to Ishvara or self-offering, that's a real skill in action. And therefore, the practices that are described now in the following verses, if they are one or many more of them are performed by us, in the spirit of offering to Lord, or in a selfless spirit, it will become yajna. And yajna is for purifying the mind. So call it yoga, karma yoga, call it yajna, call it an action performed nishkamatya, selflessly, an action performed in the spirit of self-offering, in the spirit of contribution. It is conducive to purifying the mind, which we have discussed a number of times. Because we can say that the basic impurity in the mind is selfishness, which arises in us because of our insecurity, which in turn arises from a sense of smallness, limitedness, which in turn arises from ignorance. Ignorance brings about identification with the body-mind sense complex. That creates in me the notion that I am as small or as big as this body-mind sense complex is. So because of that identification, I suffer from a sense of smallness, limitedness, insecurity. And therefore I always feel that I have to protect myself. And that makes me self-centered. The self-centeredness in turn creates raga and dvesha. Whatever I perceive as conducive to fulfilling my agenda of self-centeredness becomes an object of raga, like or attachment. And whatever I perceive as something, an object, a thing or a being, which is seen as an obstruction to fulfilling my agenda of self-centeredness, there is dvesha, aversion. This self-centeredness gives rise to raga-dveshas. In these raga-dveshas, attachment and aversion, whenever the mind is overcome by attachment or aversion, the mind is forcibly pulled to the object of attachment, meaning mind naturally thinks of that to which it is attached or that to which it is aversion. So both this raga and dvesha, they drag the mind, pull the mind away from the self, make the mind extrovert. That extrovertedness is the obstacle in our happiness. More intense the extrovertedness is, more unhappy I am. We become happy when the mind becomes inward looking, because that's where the happiness is. So this ignorance has created extrovertedness, which is the cause of unhappiness or sorrow, and which is an obstacle to self-knowledge because it keeps the mind away from the self, away from the contemplation upon the self, and therefore an obstacle to self-knowledge also. Therefore the first step is to make the mind free from the extrovertedness, meaning free from raga and dvesha, attachment and aversion. Bhagavad Gita describes these two as the great enemies. Indriyasya indriyasyate ragadvesho vyavasthitau tayorna vashamagacche tau hyasya paripanthino. Lord Krishna says that we are born with a tendency to relate to everything with ragadveshas only. I relate to things either with attachment or aversion. And therefore usually my actions are all prompted by aversion and attachment, raga and dvesha. Tayorna vasamagachet, Lord Krishna says, do not come under the sway of these raga dveshas, attachment, aversions, likes and dislikes. Tau hyasya paripanthino, they are the enemies on your path of happiness and progress, success. The Bhagavad Gita prescribes the first step is karma yoga for making the mind free from the tendencies, extrovertedness, ragadveshas. Since self-centeredness causes ragadveshas, selflessness, which is opposite of that, is the antidote to ragadvesha. Therefore, perform action in the spirit of selflessness, which is another way is as an offering to Lord or as a self-offering, as a contribution. Yoga. So since now the definition of yajna is extended to all these day-to-day activities that we perform, any activity becomes a spiritual sadhana or means when performed in the spirit of yajna or self-offering or as worship to the Lord. Put it another way. Action performed in the spirit of worship to the Lord. So any action can be performed in the spirit of worship. That becomes yajna. So in the subsequent verses, Lord Krishna describes many yajnas, many well-known spiritual religious practices with which we are familiar. And Bhashyakara says, all these different yajnas are described only to extol the Jnana Yajna. In the 24th verse, Brahmarpanam, the Jnanam, the knowledge, the vision of the wise person was described as a yajna. So we can call it Jnana Yajna. Knowledge itself is yajna. Therefore, to extol the Jnana Yajna, which is most exalted yajna, other different inferior yajnas are described. To extol the Jnana Yajna, the yajna of the nature of knowledge. So in that process we also get an understanding of a number of sort of spiritual practices. And then Lord Krishna will conclude that by telling us what's the role of these yajnas, these practices in our life. So with that background now, we can start our discussion with the verse 25. दैवमेवापरे यज्ञम् योगिनः पर्युपासते ब्रह्माज्ञावपरे यज्ञम् यज्ञेनैवोपजुह्वते Devam eva apare yajnam yogina pariyupasate. The first line says, Devam yajnam eva apare yogina. So apare yogina. Apare means others. Yogina, the yogis. Devam eva yajnam pariyupasate. So different people have different likings or aptitudes of doing different things, as subsequently Lord Krishna will describe. So there are some who are devoted to performing the yajnas. Devam yajna. Deva yajna. So devaha ijjante yena yajnena so devo yajna. See the verse, Devam Yajnam. What is Devam? Deva means a god. So Devaha Ijjante Yen Yajnana. The Yajna by which a Devata or Devatas are worshipped. Because in the Vedic times, the Yajna was a way of worshipping the Devatas. As we said, a devata is invoked in fire and offering is made. So there are those karminaha, those people devoted to this Vedic karma. They are devoted to performing these yajnas, different kinds of yajnas. Darsha Purnamasa, Jyotishthamadi, So many yajnas are described in the Vedas. Agnihotra. So there are those yogis, the people who love to perform this karma. So they devote themselves to performing Daiva Yajna, meaning that they perform those yajna now is in the traditional sense or conventional sense of a fire ritual. It's called Daiva Yajna, because in that yajna we are invoking devatas and making offerings to them. So our conventional or traditional yajna, it's called Daiva Yajna. Apare yoginaha, other yogis. Who are the other? Who is the first one? First one is the one described in the verse 24, the Jnana Yogi. Who by virtue of Jnanam, knowledge alone, performs yajna. His vision that everything is Brahman itself becomes yajna. So other than him, others, who are the traditional people who love to perform the yajnas, Lord Krishna says they perform the Daiva Yajna. Meaning that they have adopted that as a means of their spiritual or the purification of mind. It will certainly purify the mind. The Daiva Yajna also is performed Nishkamataya. If this yajnas are performed with a personal agenda of accomplishing a personal end, then of course that becomes a punya karma, virtuous action, which gives rise to the desired results in this world or in the other world. However, the same yajna performed nishkamataya as an offering to Ishvara. That Mamopata Duritakshaya Dvaraya Sri Parameshwara Prityartham. Only for Parameshwara Prityartham, for pleasing the Lord, by removing the negative effects that have accumulated in the past, I am performing this yajna. For Antahkarana Shuddhi. Yoginaha karma kurvanti sangam tyaktva atma shuddhaye. The yogis perform the action, sangam tyaktva, giving attachment to the result of the action, atma shuddhe, for purification of the mind. So here Lord Krishna simply described these people who perform these traditional yajnas for purification of mind. So this is what they like to do. Perform the yajnas, invoke the devatas, make offerings to them, please the devatas, and not ask any reward from them. May this be my offering to you. Devan bhavayitanena, may you propitiate devatas by this yajna. So this yajna is described here again as a means of purification of mind and also praising the jnana yajna. Now in the second line of this verse 25, Lord Krishna describes another yajna which is really jnana yajna. Brahma gnava pare yajnam yajnena ivopajihvati. Brahma gnav apare yajnam yajnena eva upajuhvati. Apare yogina, other yogis. In this case, the other yogis are mumukshus. Those are seekers of moksha, seekers of liberation, and they are performing the jnana yajna of the nature of nididhyasanam, contemplating upon the true nature of the self. So this is purely a mental yajna. What do? Brahmagnau. In the fire of Brahman, Brahma eva Agnihi, Brahmagnau, in the fire of Brahma, in the fire of knowledge of Brahma, Yajnena Yajnam Upajuhvati. So there are too many yajnas are here. Yajnam Upajuhvati. This word yajna here means so yajnam here means Atma, they offer the Atma. Yajnena Atmana, both the yajnas means Atma. They offer Atma to Atma in the fire of knowledge of Brahman. So this is very interesting. In the dictionary of Yaska, the word yajna also, one of the meanings is Atma. So Atmanam yajnam yajnena Atmaneva upajihvati prakshipanti. In the fire of knowledge of Brahman, they offer Atma, make an offering of Atma, by Atma. What does that mean? So here Bhashyakara explains, yajna is Atma, paramathatah parameva brahmasantam. Atma in reality is nothing but Param Brahma. Paramathatah. In the true sense, Atma, the self, the consciousness, is nothing but Brahman. Buddhyadi upadi sanyuktam. On account of, however, identification with body, mind, sense complex, as you said, that Atma, the self, is considered to be a limited entity. So Atma, who in its true nature is nothing but Brahman, the limitless, who is however thought to be a limited entity, in the fire of knowledge of Brahman. What is the knowledge of Brahman? Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. So these are the other yogis, you can call them the Jnana yogis also. In the knowledge that I am Brahman, I am limitless Brahman, in that the self, the limited self is offered. Meaning that whenever the thought of the self arises, aham karta, bhokta, sukhi, dukhi, who is the karta? Who is the doer? Nothing but Brahman. But the idea of the kartrutva, doership arises on account of identification of the buddhi, intellect. Similarly, bhokta, the experiencer, as we said earlier, all the experiencing, all this belongs to the upadhi. Only because of identification of upadhi that I think that I am a bhokta, I am a karta, therefore these notions arise in my mind. Karta, bhokta, sukhi, dukhi. And right away I remind myself, what is my true nature? I am Brahman. So because of the past samskaras or vasanas or habits, these notions keep on arising in my mind, karta, bhokta, sukhi, dukhi, etc. Because of the habitual identification with this body, mind, sense complex, where kartrutva belongs to buddhi. But because of identification, I say, I am a karta, I am a doer. When that notion arises in my mind, right away I remind myself, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Because I have that knowledge. So even when I have the knowledge that I am Brahman, the habitual error of taking myself to be a karta, bhokta continues for a period of time until I become free from the habitual error. This is called nididhyasanam. Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasanam. Shravanam is for knowledge. Listening to the teacher unfolding the Upanishad, Shravanam, is for the knowledge that I am Brahman. Mananam is to remove any doubts to that knowledge. So these two obstacles of avarana and samshaya, ignorance and doubt, are removed by Shravanam and Mananam. A third obstacle remains, that is called the Viparita Buddhi, Viparyaya. Habitual error of identifying with the body, with the mind, with the intellect, the sense organs. So habitually these notions arise. I am tall, I am short, I am father, I am mother, I am happy, I am unhappy, I am doer, I am an experiencer. So alertly I replace them by the knowledge I am Brahman. So the notion says I am Karta. Right away I assert myself, I am Brahman. Again after a while the mind says I am Bhokta. Right away I replace I am Brahman. So I am Brahman is a reality about myself which I know. So that is called the fire of knowledge. In that fire of knowledge, I am Brahman. I offer this notion, I am a Karta, I am a Bhokta. It's called the notion arising because of identification of Upadhi. So this is yajna that I perform. In the fire of knowledge, I am Brahman, I am Brahman, I am Brahman. That is the thought flow that I want to maintain. And when this kind of vritti arises, I am a Karta, I am a Bhokta, because of habitual error, right away I resolve that. In the light of knowledge that no, I am not Karta, I am Brahman, I am Brahman, I am Brahman. So this is called offering of Supadik Atma into Nirupadik Atma. Supadika means the thought arising, notion arising, identifying the Upadhi, that is offered into the fire of knowledge. Therefore, Parabrahma Swarupena Vyad Darshanam, seeing myself as Param Brahma, seeing myself as Param Brahma, seeing Atma as Param Brahma, is this yajna that Lord Krishna is talking about in the second line of the verse 25. No, this is really a different kind of yajna. This is like a jnana yajna. There also is included by Lord Krishna among other yajnas. Just again, for stuti, for extolling the jnana yajna. So those seekers, mumukshus, who are performing nididhyasanam, they perform a yajna. They offer the notions arising from identifying the upadhi into the knowledge of fire of knowledge. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, I am Brahman. So that process of nididhyasanam is described as yajna here by Lord Krishna. Brahmagna apare yajnam yajnena iva upajikhvati apare yoginaha sannyasinaha. The Brahmatmaika darshanishtaha, those who are devoted to the darshanam, the knowledge of Brahmatmaika, the identity of Atma and Brahman, they perform this kind of a sacrifice, this kind of an offering, that every notion arising from identification upadhi is offered into the knowledge, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, I am Brahman. Now we proceed with the next verses, where Lord Krishna describes some day-to-day common practices also as yajna. As to how when these are performed in the spirit of worship, they also become yajna. They also become the means of self-purification, purification of mind. So let us read the verse 26. Shrotraadinindriyanyanye Samyamagnishu juhvati Shabdadin vishayananye Indriyagnishu juhvati. So first line describes the restraining of the sense organs as a yajna, where something is offered. Yajna is an action where some offering is made. So in the Sanyama Agnishu, Sanyama is the fire of self-control. Shrotradini Indriyani Jukhvati Anye. Other yogis, each one of them is called a yogi. They offer in the fire of self-control, they offer the indriyani, they offer the sense organs, shrotradi. Shrotra means the organ of hearing. So we have these 5 organs of perception and 5 organs of action. Each one of them has a natural tendency to dwell upon their respective objects. Shrotrendriya, the organ of hearing, dwells upon the shabda, the sounds of different kinds, because there is a natural affinity that a sense organ has with a respective sense object. So ears have a natural affinity for pleasant sounds. The organ of touch has a natural affinity for pleasant touch, smooth, soft touch. The eyes have an affinity for beautiful forms, colors. The palate has affinity for, delicious taste and delicious things. And the nose, the organ of smell, has affinity for pleasant smells, different fragrances. So because of this affinity, in the Upanishad it is said, Paranchikhani vyatunasvambhu tasmat parang pashyati nantaratman. The Lord has created the sense organs and the mind extrovert, meaning that the sense organs and the mind are created with a natural affinity for the respective objects. Tasmat parang pashyati. Therefore, left to itself, the mind will always dwell upon the external object, because that is where its affinity is. Never looks at itself. Nantaratmanam. Mind doesn't look at antaratma because its tendency is always to look out. Therefore, here is a yogi who wants to reverse this trend. And he wants to make the mind inward looking by restraining the sense organs, by restraining them from just dwelling upon their objects, habitual dwelling upon the objects, because there is a natural affinity which is a result of ignorance. Mind has an affinity for sense objects because it thinks that is where the happiness is. So, meaning that we are born with this ignorance. Ignorance of the true nature of ourselves, where the self is, the happiness is taken to be an unhappy self, and ignorance of the true nature of the sense objects, which have no content of happiness, look upon them as means of happiness. So this is what is the situation with which we are born. If the mind is left to itself, it will naturally dwell upon the objects because it thinks that that is where the happiness is. But here I know Now, with an understanding from Vedanta, I know that happiness is the nature of the self. The sense objects have no content of happiness because they are not designed for giving me happiness. The things and objects of the world are designed for fulfilling my physical needs. That is their purpose. They are not designed to give me happiness. Physical level, there are hunger and thirst and heat and cold, etc. And therefore to provide those needs, these objects are meant. Happiness comes only from the self. When that viveka is there, nitya vastu viveka, that happiness can only be nitya vastu, happiness can be only in that which is limitless, which is eternal, it cannot be an ephemeral. That viveka or discrimination one has, he puts that viveka into practice. So, he restrains his sense organs from dwelling upon the sense objects and keeps them inward looking. Shama, Dama, Uparama. In Vedanta, this is called Uparama. That both kinds of sense organs of action and organs of perception, they are restrained from dwelling upon their respective objects and they are made, that means that they are withdrawn from their natural activities. It is called Sanyama Agni, the fire of the self-control. Where Indriyani Juhvati, Shrotradini Indriyani Juhvati. He offers the Indriyas, he offers the sense organs into the fire of self-control, meaning that he deprives the sense organs from dwelling upon their self, the sense objects. In Yoga Shastra it's called Pratyahara. We can call it Uparati, Yoga Shastra calls it Pratyahara. This is Yajna. And when done as an offering to Ishvara, as worship of Ishvara, it becomes a means of Antakarana Shuddhi. Others are not as well, others do not have that kind of self-control. So second line describes the yajna performed by more ordinary people. Shrotradin, Shabdadin, Vishyan, Anye, Indriyagnishu Juhvati, Anye. Other yogis, we call them all yogis of one kind or the other, all spiritual seekers. So others who do not have that kind of a self-control to restrain the sense organs from the respective objects, meaning that the urge in the sense organs is so strong that they control me and therefore they make me experience the sense objects, make me satisfy the urge of the sense organs. So the ears demand that I want to listen to this kind of music and my palate demands I want this kind of taste, etc. When I cannot control that, meaning that I provide those needs of the sense organs, there are some restraint can be done. Shabdadin Vishayananye Indriyagnishu Juhvati. Indriya Sanyamam eva kurvanti, not self-restraint. The Sanyama or the restraint at the level of sense organs. What is that? That aviruddha vishaya grahanam. At least I do not allow my sense organs to indulge into something which is harmful to me. The objects that are permitted by the scriptures. And there are things that are prohibited by the scriptures. For example, they would say, Suram na pibed. One should not consume alcohol. one should not eat meat, etc., etc. These are all said in the Shrutis and Smritis. So all of these consumptions are looked upon as damaging the self, damaging the mind. And therefore, going against my own interest of being happy and at peace with myself. Therefore, at least this much restraint I can do, that I will not allow my palate to eat things that are prohibited. The palate may want to taste things which are harmful to me. The ears may want to hear the sounds and stuff like that which is harmful to me. There can be music which can be harmful to me. Music which has violence in there. All kinds of stuff is there which damages the mind. I prevent my ears from listening to that. My ears can listen to the music or the sound that are accepted in the scriptures as not harmful to me. Therefore, aviruddha vishaya grahanam homa manyate, that I allow my sense organs to experience or enjoy the objects that are not prohibited by the scriptures. That's what so that much restraint I do. The yogi described in the first line, he completely starves his sense organs because he has a greater level of self-control, and therefore he is able to make his mind much more inward looking. Here in the second line, I am a lesser, lower quality of yogi, do not possess that kind of discrimination, that kind of self-control. But at least this much I do, that I do not allow my sense organs to indulge in any objects that are considered harmful or damaging to me in the spiritual sense. Bhagavad Gita describes later on in the 17th chapter 3 kinds of food: sattvic food, rajas food, tamas food. So there is food that is conducive to make mind tamas dull. And so I prevent my sense organs from indulging in that kind of food. Too much rajasic food also makes mind too much stimulated and violent. So I prevent my sense organs from experiencing those also. So that is also called a yajna, as long as that is done as an offering. Here also offering is involved. What is the offering? Offering of the not sanctioned objects. Not indulging into objects that are not sanctioned by the scriptures is also a self-restraint of one kind, which is also a yajna or offering. So therefore Lord Krishna includes that also in the various yajnas that he is describing. Shabdadin Vishyananye Indriyagnishu Juhvati. Now Lord Krishna proceeds further describing other kinds of yajnas, which will continue in the next class.